guys. Thank you for coming out today. Thank you for being there to show your support to us.
What makes an event truly historical? Is it the sheer scale of the drama that unfolds, the long-lasting impact on cultures and civilizations, or the way it shatters the normalities of its era, sparking shockwaves that ripple across the centuries? In this story of our world's most pivotal moments, we'll explore events that shaped the very trajectory of human existence. Get ready to journey through time itself. History is more than just a static collection of dates and deeds. It's a living, breathing epic that has unfolded over millennia through the triumphs and struggles of our ancestors. Every great historical turning point reverberates through generations, altering the very course of how societies rise, viewpoints evolve, and cultures indelibly shift. Event 1: the classical ages of Greece and Rome. Our tale transports us to the sun-drenched Mediterranean over 2,500 years ago, an era drenched in the brilliance of two remarkable civilizations taking shape, Greece and Rome. This was an age when the foundations of Western thought and achievement were being poured. In the eternal city of Athens, the revolutionary ideals of democracy were breathed into existence, challenging the autocratic model. Great minds like Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle unleashed their expansive thinking and questioning on philosophy, science, politics, and more. Meanwhile, in the emerging Roman Republic and subsequent empire, the world witnessed staggering achievements, groundbreaking architecture, ambitious engineering feats, advanced urban planning, and influential legal codes. The Roman military juggernaut also systematically conquered and amalgamated a vast realm under its power and cultural influence. These two cradles of Western civilization bequeathed a staggering array of intellectual, artistic, and pragmatic legacies that still echo across our modern universities, courtrooms, constitutions, and everyday life. Without these classical ages as the bedrock, our contemporary societies may have looked entirely unrecognizable. Event 2: the life of Jesus and founding of Christianity. Our next pivotal event transports us to a dusty, ancient land of Judea under the boot of the mighty Roman Empire some 2,000 years ago. It was here that an itinerant Jewish preacher began sharing revolutionary teachings of spiritual enlightenment and human equality that would ultimately spark one of the world's most enduring religions: Christianity. Jesus of Nazareth's simple yet profound messages to love thy neighbor, turn the other cheek, and put compassion before material wealth struck a resonant moral chord. His purported miracles of healing the sick and blessing the poor only amplified his countercultural voice. But it was his final days that cemented his legacy. After being betrayed and arrested by Roman authorities, threatened by his growing influence, Jesus was crucified, only to be resurrected 3 days later according to the biblical accounts. This act became emblematic of the Christian notions of ultimate sacrifice, rebirth, and salvation through faith. What began with a small group of devoted disciples spreading Jesus' teachings soon mushroomed into an unstoppable grassroots spiritual movement across the Roman world. Despite periods of brutal persecution, Christianity continued rapidly propagating until ultimately being embraced as the official religion of the Roman Empire in 380 AD. From these seminal events and beginnings emerged what is today the world's largest religion with over 2 billion adherents across the globe. Event 3: the life of Muhammad and founding of Islam. Cut next to the scorching deserts of 7th century Arabia, where we witness the rise of another monotheistic faith that now claims over a quarter of the world's population: Islam. Its founder was an Arabian merchant named Muhammad, who received a series of revelations that he claimed were the words of God, or Allah. After facing initial opposition and violence for preaching the new religion and attacking the pagan idolatry practices common in Mecca at the time, Muhammad and his followers eventually fled north to Medina. It was here that both the new faith's principles and strict moral conduct were codified in the Quran, Islam's holy scripture. Before long, Islam had swept outward from the Arabian Peninsula, transforming the religious makeup of the Mediterranean world and achieving imperial status by the early 8th century. Successors known as caliphs rapidly expanded Muslim empires and helped ignite an Islamic golden age, fostering advancements in mathematics, science, art, and more. But at its core, the faith taught by Muhammad centered on the belief in one all-powerful God, worthy of devotion through ritual prayer 5 times daily while facing the sacred site of Mecca. His teachings explicitly rejected the Christian idea of the Holy Trinity, and Muslims consider Muhammad the final prophet sent by God to mankind. Event 4. The birth of Israel. In 1948, jumping ahead over 1,000 years, we come to one of the most pivotal geopolitical events of the 20th century, with profound and lasting global ramifications still reverberating powerfully to this day: the birth of the modern state of Israel in 1948. After centuries of oppression, violence, and discrimination against the Jewish diaspora, culminating in the horrors of the Holocaust during World War II, growing nationalist desires for a Jewish homeland intensified. Those cries were finally answered when the newly formed United Nations approved a plan in 1947 to partition British-ruled Palestine into separate Jewish and Arab states. The following year, on May 14, 1948, Israel officially declared statehood and independence as the long-awaited safe haven for the Jewish people. But this provocative establishment immediately triggered a broader Arab-Israeli war as surrounding nations swiftly attacked, vehemently rejecting the notion of a Jewish foothold amidst the Middle Eastern Muslim world. Despite being vastly outgunned, Israeli forces secured key frontiers and enough territory for their nascent nation, setting the stage for 6 more decades of unresolved conflicts with Palestinians, surrounding Arab countries, and a seemingly intractable geopolitical crisis reverberating worldwide. Event 5. The Printing Revolution. Let's rewind back to 15th century Renaissance Europe and bear witness to a pivotal technological advancement that catalyzed the propagation of knowledge, ideas, and social progress in ways never before possible: the invention of the movable type printing press. It was in the German city of Mainz around 1440 that a goldsmith by the name of Johannes Gutenberg assembled his ingenious system of hand-setting, then mass-producing whole pages of metallic Latin script onto paper. This marked the birth of the printed book and dawning of the Gutenberg printing revolution. Whereas any published works previously had to be painstakingly hand-copied by scribes, restricting their circulation to only aristocrats and religious institutions, the printing press democratized and streamlined textual knowledge sharing. Suddenly, books in the thousands could be churned out affordably and widely distributed for the first time. From revisionist religious writings critiquing Catholic Church dogma, to classical texts from antiquity being revived and eagerly consumed, to new secular titles celebrating human achievement over divine authority, the rapid dissemination of these published ideas stoked inquiry, sparked intellectual debate, and accelerated the expansion of the Renaissance's transformative spirit across Europe. Movable type printing presses soon spread rapidly, fueling eruptions of knowledge and social awakenings that ushered in the eventual Enlightenment, Protestant Reformation, and Scientific Revolution epochs. It was an innovation that truly set the spark for the modern world's propagation. Event 6. The French Revolution and Rise of Modern Democracy. Leaping ahead to 1789, we arrive in France amidst a social powder keg about to erupt into one of history's most violently disruptive yet philosophically influential events: the French Revolution. What triggered was an extraordinary decade-long convulsion, remaking the nation's identity while simultaneously inspiring popular sovereignty uprisings worldwide. For generations, egregious inequalities had fueled swelling unrest among France's oppressed lower classes, as the lavish excesses of King Louis XVI's monarchy and aristocratic elites continued consuming the nation's wealth. A severe crop failure in 1788 only amplified the impoverished masses' desperation and anger. On July 14, 1789, Paris revolutionaries achieved their spark by storming the Bastille fortress, igniting a chain reaction of public uprisings, overthrowing the Ancien regime and abolishing feudalism. More violence was to follow as radicals like Robespierre imposed a murderous reign of terror, attempting forceful establishment of a fully equal republic. But beyond the tumult emerged progressive ideals: freedom of speech and religion, social equality, and the notion that governments derive legitimacy from the will of the people rather than divine mandate. These revolutionary concepts quickly broke out across Europe like a social pandemic. Event 7. The long struggle to abolish slavery. Worldwide, our next monumental historical milestone was reached not through some sudden earth-shattering event, but rather a protracted, hard-fought moral crusade spanning multiple centuries and continents as more enlightened minds strive to abolish one of humanity's cruelest institutions, chattel slavery. For eons stretching back into antiquity, the despicable practice of capturing or breeding humans purely for forced servitude and ownership by others existed virtually unquestioned as a simple fact of life. Enslaved Africans faced particularly brutal conditions after being introduced to colonial plantations across the Americas via the barbaric transatlantic slave trade. But by the late 18th century, escalating philosophical opposition to slavery began brewing in both the United States and Britain, where Quaker and evangelical Christian groups preached the universal human rights principles prohibited by bondage. The Haitian Revolution became the first successful national slave uprising, inspiring abolitionists worldwide. In 1807, Britain's Parliament passed the first laws criminalizing the transatlantic slave trade. Then in 1833, the Slavery Abolition Act fully emancipated the country's enslaved population across its colonies. Decades earlier in 1780, Pennsylvania too had become the first U.S. region outlawing new slave imports and codifying gradual abolition of slavery. Despite this progress, the institution remained deeply entrenched in the American South until erupting into the catastrophically bloody U.S. Civil War, after which slavery was forcibly abolished nationwide by the 13th Amendment in 1865. Other countries like Brazil and Cuba soon followed with liberation laws of their own. It ultimately took until the 20th century for the remaining African and Muslim nations to finally disavow their human bondage practices, with Mauritania being the final nation abolishing slavery outright in 1981. Its abolition represents one of the longest and most vital struggles against human exploitation and oppression ever undertaken through sustained global activism. Event 8. 1796. The first vaccine is invented. While most historical events we cover triggered seismic societal shifts or represented major developmental milestones for humanity, our next momentous occurrence was more humbly rooted in a single pioneering medical breakthrough. In 1796, an English physician by the name of Edward Jenner made a discovery that would ultimately save millions upon millions of lives in the centuries to come. Having observed that milkmaids who contracted a milder virus called cowpox seemed immune to future infections of the deadly smallpox, Jenner theorized he could preemptively inoculate people against this scourge. And so, in a daring experiment conducted on a young boy, Jenner introduced cowpox virus matter into the child's arm and proved his hypothesis correct. The boy developed immunity to smallpox going forward. In doing so, Jenner invented the world's first successful vaccine. This laid the all-important groundwork for generations of immunizations and vaccination programs to systematically wipe out or control infectious diseases that had ravaged populations globally throughout history. Jenner's innovative technique became the catalyst for one of the greatest life-saving innovations in human history. Event 9. The Civil Rights Movement, 1954-1968. Our final monumental event was not one single occurrence, but rather a hard-fought, nationwide campaign spanning decades of struggle, setbacks, and courage in the face of injustice. It was the civil rights movement that finally brought legal racial discrimination in America to an end. In the years following World War II, African Americans still faced staggering inequalities and outright bigotry across huge swaths of the United States, particularly in the Jim Crow segregated South. But they refused to accept this any longer. The spark that lit the modern movement was Rosa Parks' defiance of segregated public transportation. Her arrest for refusing to give up her bus seat to a white passenger in 1955 ignited the Montgomery bus boycott and thrust a young pastor named Martin Luther King Jr. into the leadership spotlight. Over the next decade plus, figures like King, John Lewis, and many more would help orchestrate voter registration drives, economic boycotts, sit-ins at segregated businesses, freedom rides into hostile territories, and historic marches demanding equality and protection under the law. They endured beatings, jailings, and vicious hatred while protesting peacefully and stoking the nation's conscience. Finally, monumental legislation like the 1964 Civil Rights Act and 1965 Voting Rights Act dismantled legalized segregation and discrimination, prohibiting the racial injustices that had marred America for far too long. Though more progress remains to be achieved, the Civil Rights era enshrined equality as a cornerstone American ideal. Event 10. Invention of the Internet. Fast forward over 20 centuries to a pivotal technological breakthrough that would reshape how information, communication, business, entertainment, and social dynamics flowed across the globe. The invention of the Internet. In the late 1980s, an interconnected global network of computer systems finally began to coalesce from decades of research into digital communications. What emerged was a paradigm-shattering innovation that democratized information access while fostering whole new virtual realms for human connectivity. From those rudimentary digital pathways blossomed the World Wide Web, and ultimately an internet universe of websites, email, streaming, e-commerce, instant messaging, and social media platforms that have transformed how we work, learn, purchase, entertain ourselves, and relate to each other. The instantaneous nature of internet communication collapsed physical barriers between nations, facilitated revolutions in science and industry, and engendered globally shared cultural phenomena and societal impacts that were unthinkable in the analog era. There's no denying the birth of the internet ushered in a seismic upheaval, rivaling the harnessing of any other general-purpose technology throughout history.